God, it just makes it so much easier that there's a countdown now, so I don't have to actually verbally count down. What's going on, people? It's another Sunday, another episode of Lost in our trek through 2025 to cover all of seasons 2 and 3. We got a little bit of a catchy title here, episode 5 and Found. This is our first Jin and Sun episode of this season 2. And yeah, what I'll say is that this episode is probably the most reminiscent of season 1. If that makes sense. Like I said, we've kind of moved past the origin phase. We're now into the plot phase. But I feel like now that things inside the hatch have kind of settled down, we kind of take a little bit of a break from that. I would say also this is probably the episode since episode 2 that is focused the most on the other side of the island, on the tail end survivors that Michael, Jin, and Sawyer have found themselves with. And we start to get a little bit more of a sense of those characters and why those characters are, let's say, a little bit more uptight than our group of survivors have gotten, that we've gotten to know. Luke, anything to say before we get started?
No, I think you covered the main part of this. This is another slow down episode before the season ramps up again. Due to, I'm sure there will be some big events that happen, but we are yet to get to those.
Yes, indeed. Like I said, we're back in our slow down phase in this next episode of Talkin' Lost. Stay tuned. You know, what's funny? It's I don't often feel bad for the viewers, just in general, because viewers often make their choices that are completely independent of us and our show. But it always does make me laugh when I think of the people who may have gone and watched Lost, who have never seen it based on our suggestion, and then they went and binged the entire show. And meanwhile, we're only still early on in season 2, and it's like, man, sucks if you're still watching us week to week, and we're like, and you watch the entire show, so you now know like kind of all the mysteries that are coming out, and we're still like recapping it week to week.
Like
But
we'll get there.
we'll get there. We'll get there. We're taking it at our own pace. We're taking it on our own time, ultimately. And honestly, I prefer doing it this way because it allows me to, again, pick up on some of the smaller details that I would not have gotten binging it, because I binged it the first time. I mean, I took breaks, obviously, but I binged it the first time. And there was a lot of stuff that I picked up on that was cool, but there were certain things where when I got to the later, basically the way that my original watch trajectory goes, that I watched the first 3 seasons very sporadically throughout all of college, right? So that's 4 years that it took me to finish the first 3 seasons. Then when I get done with college, in like the months leading up to COVID, I start to get back into it. I was finishing up The Wire, which was another show that I'd started in my college years and never finished. And then that's when The Wire got really good, and I binged through the last 3 seasons. And I'm like, man, I feel like I missed a lot of details there. But instead of going back and rewatching The Wire, I instead decided to go back and keep watching Lost. And then, of course, I did the exact same thing with the last 3 seasons of Lost, because the seasons got drastically shorter. So we was able to binge through the rest of them. And again, there's certain details that you become appreciative of with this show and with these with these types of shows, honestly, like the episodes where we do slow down and we do take a break from, I guess, quote unquote, the plot. And what I like about what this season's done so far is how it really has taken its time with getting kind of the 2 sets of characters back together. This would be a storytelling trope that you would see continue throughout the next couple of seasons. The fact that the characters split up and they kind of are doing their own thing. It's been, even though it's only been like 4 days, as they say in this episode, to us, it's been a decent amount of time since Michael, Jin, and Sawyer set out on their raft journey, and everything that's happened has happened since the end of season 1 and the beginning of this season. They only had a brief interaction with the others, but this episode and Found, it's notable for 2 reasons. One, the fact that I think they do something really interesting with the flashbacks here with following both Jin and Sun. There's not too much happening with our main group of survivors. The plot there is Sun lost her wedding ring, but it creates this really interesting narrative thread where it kind of continues to show the connection between the 2 of them, and how, if anything, their respective absence from each other, their bond has grown, because the last we saw them before they separated, they were kind of going through a little bit of a marital struggle. Jin was still trying to, keep them separated from everybody else and not really interact. And then he suffers this devastating betrayal when he learns that Sun has been learning English this whole time behind his back and was planning on leaving him. And so as a result, that causes him to begin helping Michael with the raft and such because he just wants to be away from her. And then, of course, they have this beautiful moment where they kind of rejoin with each other, and Jin reveals that, he's going out to get help so that he can save her. And then, they get attacked by the others, and they're stranded on the other side of the island. None of them know if they're alive or not. I mean, Jin, I'm assuming, knows that Sun is still alive. Sun does not, obviously. But Jin is also, he's become different than the person that we got to know when we first met him, in the first season. He's somebody who's grown this connection with his compatriots, with Sawyer and Michael, And so obviously on the other side of the island, when Michael leaves at the beginning of this episode to go and find Walt, Jin is immediately like, we gotta go, we gotta get him back, because if what they're saying is true, the tail end survivors, and that they've clearly been dealing with the others a lot more than we have. It's established in this episode that whatever happened with the tail end survivors in those, I think they say later on, it's been 48 days, I think, that they've been on the island. Whatever happened with the tail end survivors and their interactions with the others clearly was a lot worse than our main group of survivors, But we're going to get to that in the next couple of episodes. So I know I kind of just dropped a lot there, but what do you think so far of that? Because I guess it's been a while.
You're on a roll. I just had to let
Yeah.
you finish. Don't get in the way of an oncoming snowball. Just let it get bigger and bigger until it stops. But yeah, it was a really good episode. Like you said, that connection with Jin and Michael, I think that's a testament to the kind of situation that they're in, and these extreme situations can cause people to become friends even though they don't speak the same language. And it just having to do that, like, just that communication, and still make it plausible. And he's starting to learn a few words, so
yeah, that's the thing too, is that even though we still got the language barrier, that at the very least, like you see with his conversation with Sawyer, with Michael, with Mr. Echo later on in the episode, another awesome addition to the show, who I'll get into in a bit. You're starting to see, like, yeah, like he's been with them enough now to understand them, even if he doesn't know exactly what they're saying.
Yeah, and like you said just before, when you talk about how you consume, I just really like having this consistency in my life when so many things are sporadic. Just every weekend, it's Lost. You get another episode of Lost. What's happening on the island? This week, it's a Jin and Sun episode. And when I thought, okay, we kind of had the first season of flashbacks, what more is there? And we get this one, which is how they met in the first place, and who Jin was before
Yes.
he started working for Sun's father. He was just a what are they called, doorman?
Yeah, the doorman.
Yeah, just a good guy who lets a father and a kid in because he has to pee, and he gets fired for that. And just the kind of character that Jin is, and why he would go to help Michael find Walt, even though he's just one man against, like, how many others we saw them walk by. I'm assuming that's
Well,
them.
we'll get to that in a bit. Yeah, that was some great visual imagery as far as Lost goes. But yeah, touching on the Jin and Sun flashback, you're 100% right in the sense of where it's kind of set up as this is their origin story as far as how they met. What was so interesting about their respective flashbacks in season 1 is, even though it was mirror versions of kind of the same set of events from each of their different perspectives, this is the kind of their origin story, how they met ultimately. And it adds, even, I think, again, going into the season 2 flashbacks, how season 2, the flashbacks, the role that they're playing is that they're adding more context to the stuff that we kind of already knew about the characters. So that's what's interesting about kind of the way the flashbacks are utilized, because you're going to see how they're changed in each season ultimately. Season 1 is we're just getting to know these characters. We're just kind of, getting some extra context on who these people were before they came to the island. This season, we know who they are. We have a pretty good sense of them. And with the exception of the new characters that we get, this set of characters, we're just getting more context, more added to stuff, to the events that we already knew, for running it down. Jack, we saw he was married in the first season. Now this season, we got to know how he got married. Michael, we know that he was separated from the mother, from Walt's mother. Now we see how that process happened. Locke, we see his father in the last season stole his kidney, and now in this season we see him trying to move on. He is just not able to. Then last week with Hurley, and how we know that the Hurley won the lottery, which is what brought him to Australia, but all these bad things started happening to him. And that episode, last week's episode, was more so kind of him trying to reckon with that fact and try and keep things as normal as possible before ultimately, this massive inevitable change happened. And now this season, and now this episode rather, we get Sun and Jin, where we saw how they were married and kind of how tumultuous that marriage was at the end of the day. And now we start to get a reason why. We got the sense of, again, there was this massive class difference between Sun, who was raised very, very wealthy, versus Jin, who came from a poor fishing village. And now, again, in addition to kind of what's so interesting about the class struggle that has become all too common that maybe people may not have been aware of at the time. What's so interesting is we get that from an otherworldly perspective. We get that from the Korean perspective and how much more harsh and more strict that dividing line between classes is ultimately. Where Jin again comes from this poor fishing village, is able to impress the manager of the hotel that he's working at. But he's now expected to kind of, even though he's crossed the dividing line, he's still expected to reinforce that line ultimately and show that, like, people that come from your side of the world are not allowed to cross over this threshold. And when it comes to, it's like, oh wow, that comes before this honor, this basic human decency of this dad who comes from the same fishing village just needs a place for a son to pee. And now it's the fact of, I forget what the guy says to him, but it's like something along the lines of, it's like, people like you, and he's just like, yeah.
Yeah, don't let people like you in
Exactly.
here.
And
Like,
he's basically just like, yeah, fuck that. I'm not dealing with that. And earlier on, he got this kind of like omen from his roommate, basically, that he would meet the love of his life and that it would be signified by orange. And of course, and that's tying into a little bit more, not quite the supernatural, but a little bit more the philosophical, if you will. This whole idea of, oh, this stuff all seems hokum. There's no like predictability or realness or no logic to back this sort of stuff up. Really, this sort of I guess interpretation of signs, if you will, but there is something to it. Again, tying back to the whole man of science, man of faith thing. This whole dividing line of, it's not quite one, it's definitely not quite the other, but again, the balance line is somewhere down the middle. And Lindelof has talked about this in many, many different forms. We're going to get into it specifically once we get to the last season as well. And it's interesting that we're talking about Severance right after this because that also ties into this as well, which is that this idea of omens, and if there is some realness to it, the idea of this kind of dimension as we perceive it is not necessarily all that there is to reality and existence, where he says it's like, oh, this I'm gonna meet the love of my life and it's gonna have something to do with the color orange. He's seemingly left this amazing job that it turns out had a lot more to it than he realized. He sees this gorgeous woman walking by in an orange dress. He like doesn't think anything of it, turns around, bumps into Sun, and you just immediately see the connection that's established there. You don't, obviously there's more that happens in between there, and then you also have Sun as well, who is going kind of through her own version of that as well, where she's being set up with this arranged marriage kind of, and she kind of unintentionally ends up bonding with the guy because they're both like kind of bonding over the fact that they've both been kind of put into the situation that they weren't expected to be in.
we've seen this like
We've
in
seen
many things.
in many different things, but it's interesting how it kind of gets flipped on its head here, where she ends up unintentionally bonding with the guy, and then the guy basically turns around and is like, yeah, I'm basically gonna go to America and marry this woman that I met from university. I hope you're cool with that. And she's like, yeah, sure. And
Sure,
it's kind of
that's what I was thinking.
that interaction is just great. I thought that was just so funny. I remember laughing hysterically at that the first time I saw that. And it's like, oh man, just how things get interpreted completely the wrong way, But it's like it's really good, I think, connective tissue. Sun and Jin have always been kind of it's almost again like by virtue of the fact that, okay, like this is the first time that we're really trying to take a more humanistic edge to what is perceived as, almost alien cultures, at least at that time. The fact that, it had been so long, obviously, but we still felt like there was this alienation between kind of generally Eastern culture. And this is really one of the first instances where we get to see so much pathos, so much humanity given to that sect of the world. And it's fascinating and it's really good. And there's a reason why Sun and Jin are such fan favorite characters and why their storylines always tend to be, more more interesting. I mean, all of these characters' origins are respectively interesting, but on the island itself, and kind of the other half of the reason why this episode is so interesting is we've obviously heard talk about the others a lot, and kind of the reason why they're, kind of their menace is felt in these early seasons is because, again, it's going based off of a lot of what you can't see, but you can hear and feel them, and the fact that, you only see them one time in the episode, but kind of the way that the tail end survivors, the fear is present on their faces, where
Yeah,
again,
it's a don't show the shark. Like stretch it as long as you can.
yes,
Create the fear of them. Like we saw them on the boat. I think that was itself like pretty scary. But this is like a whole nother thing. They're walking around barefoot in the jungle, like, covered in mud. Like Jin and Mr. Echo, who my mom says will be an important character
yes,
going
he will,
forward.
he will.
and he's great. I really love him. Um, and yeah, just that scene of them hiding like just like a few centimeters away, like
Yeah.
it's just great.
But also not even just when you see their feet pass by, just the fact that like Mr. Echo senses them. Like, I mean, like he gets this sixth sense of them, like as they're tracking Michael, and he literally tells him to get down, like almost like what's assumed to be a couple minutes before they show up. And again, it's just that the look on their man, Echo and that actor, Adewale Akinye Agbaye, man, that guy, every time he shows up in something, he is always like the best part of anything that he was the scene stealer in Oz for the first 4 seasons that he was on the show before his character was, tragically exited. And I've heard tell that he is a little bit of a difficult actor to work with, which is tough, but man, it really shows in the roles that he has. Like every time he shows up in a movie, in a show, he had a micro part in season 5 of Game of Thrones as the leader of the slaver who brings Tyrion and Jorah to Meereen to sell them. He's just the massive frame, those intense eyes, the very deep voice, usually with the different accent. I believe he's British, but again, he's no stranger to doing accent
He
work.
was Killer Croc and Suicide
Yes,
Squad,
he was.
right?
Yes, he
Yeah.
was. That was unfortunately him. A little bit of a thankless role there. But my point
Not
stands.
his fault, that role.
Definitely not his fault. But my
He
point.
made the most of it. He made the
Yes,
most
he
of
really
it.
did.
Beautiful.
Yeah, but my point stands that he is always a Caesar. I really, again, it's the fact that there's so much less of the tail end survivors. But again, I feel like we've already gotten to get a pretty good sense of them, even though we've only spent a certain amount of time. Very good introduction for a whole new set of characters. Like I said, Michelle Rodriguez as Ana Lucia, Cynthia Watros as Libby, Bernard, who revealed to be Rose's surviving husband, who we thought was dead all this time. So we've kind of got that connection there. We've got the other one as well, but she's really not that important ultimately at the end of the day. Yeah, it's interesting how they've managed to like kind of include this a completely other faction of characters who were on the same plane as them, but like because they've had to experience vastly different circumstances, they really do have this much kind of different sense of, living and surviving on the island. Whereas our characters are kind of just like incorporated into their everyday life. They are very much still on the, keeping it down low, being wary of the fact that they are not the only ones on this island, being a lot more careful, a lot more cautious, a lot more strict with the rule set, And Ana Lucia as well, we also get to know a little bit more of her. Again, she is very tough, no nonsense, calls the shots, does not really have any sort of tolerance for for backtalk or anything. You already see this contemptuous relationship that's been formed with her and Sawyer. Sawyer also not looking too good from that gunshot on his shoulder. It is only getting worse.
No, I read the episode description of the next one. It's not looking good for him.
Not looking good, really, for not just for Sawyer, but for a couple of different characters that we're gonna see. But yeah, so already you have this dichotomy that's been established as the difference between our main set of survivors and the tail end survivors. We got our first instance of the others walking by, and again, a really, really frightening image, like just purely awe-inspiring. Like it reminds me of, ironically enough, also there's a reason why I feel like I don't remember who was ripping off from who, but again, back when the White Walkers were only known as the others in those early seasons of Game of Thrones, again, kind of how they would raise the level of fear surrounding those, by often showing them at a distance, not having them at close-ups, hearing them before you saw them, really establishing and building up the level of fear before you actually see them. Like you were saying, the comparison to the shark in Jaws. So you have that. You have Jin manages to save Michael, and they manage to convince them, being like, look, we're going to help you find Walt, but we've got to get back to our main group of characters first before we do that. And, you can't just go out there guns blazing, like I said, it's because whatever these others are, they have been shown that they're clearly the ones that have your kid, and they are clearly not to be messed with. So we got to be careful here. And then back on the main beach, like I said, the main beach, that's kind of like the secondary plot of the island. But, you have Sun looking for a wedding ring. You have her getting different advice from people, Jack. We're getting more and more like kind of build up as far as like what happened between Jack and his wife and ultimately why they separated. But you have Jack trying to give her advice, which is basically where, it always ends up kind of turning up where you least expect it. You have Hurley trying to do his best by saying that, Vincent may have eaten it, and they end up like trading some interesting backstory there. You have, she has a little bit of a breakdown, so it's ripping up the garden, and you have Locke come in. And
Locke
once again,
always shows up. Like the writers are like, hey, we need someone to give some good advice.
Shows up, knows
Locke
exactly what to say, always has like some bombs of wisdom to just drop right there. And like again, just with this great, and Son's like, I don't think I've ever seen you angry. And Locke's like, oh, I used to get angry, believe me. And of course, he another great use of dropping the title in the episode where he's like, I stopped being lost, and everyone's almost, you can almost hear the background, everyone being like, oh, he said the title in the show of the thing. And but yeah, just some more great nuggets of wisdom. And then finally, of course, it's Kate that ends up helping her find it when what's it called? I still don't know what to make of this final scene. Really, again, any scene of Kate, we haven't been seeing much of her this season, but the sequences that we have seen, like after she helped, so far, Kate's role in this season consists of accidentally getting the computer that is hooked up to the button that if it isn't pressed every 108 minutes, the island might blow up. She almost like gets that destroyed. She takes a bottle of shampoo and directly undercuts Hurley when he's supposed to be keeping track of all the itinerary of the stuff in the hatch. And then as soon as Sun shows her where the bottle is of all the messages that her and Claire and Shannon found last episode that Sun buried for the purposes of, not freaking out everybody, Kate immediately just opens the bottle and starts going through all of everybody's secret messages. And her excuse is, oh, I didn't get a chance to say goodbye. And then they just happen to find the ring there as far as where Sun buried it. And I'm like, wait, are we supposed to be thanking Kate for that? Like, something feels off there a bit.
I don't know what they're really doing with Kate right now. I think they need Sawyer back to do something more compelling with Kate.
I agree.
So, we're just waiting for that.
Yeah, we're just kind of waiting for Sawyer and Kate to be reunited. Don't worry, it'll happen in the next couple of episodes for sure. Like I said, where we don't have that much longer. Like I said, the Helen survivors have set out. They're starting to make their journey back towards the main beach, and
because they're going on that. We don't know how big the island is really, right. So we don't know how long that's going to take.
Right, exactly. But shit, just lost my train of thought there. No, yeah, that's exactly it. But yeah, they may be reunited sooner rather than later. But like I said, it's time for all the people who are on the plane to be reunited as they continue to kind of explore. Like I said, we're still very early on in this season. We're only going to be 6 episodes in by the time we wrap up the set of March episodes next week. So, like I said, that's really it as far as everything this episode goes. Like I said, we got so you just recently caught up and finished with
I caught up an hour ago.
Wow. Oh, so you really
I said I would get there, and I got
there.
You
did, and you were under the gun. Oh man, I'm excited to talk about it. So that was, like I said, we're not gonna do social media plugs at the end of this episode because anybody who's watching us either on YouTube or is listening to us on Spotify, we're covering Severance next. And oh man, we've got a lot of stuff to cover there. So
I think this is maybe the first time where I'm the least positive on a thing that everyone is overwhelmingly positive on. Yeah.
Oh man, save that. We're gonna get back to that. I'm very, very happy though that I love it when somebody throws out an alternate take to everyone's popularity. So stay tuned.
I never have an alternate take to.
I know you're usually again. So I'm like, you're not known to be contrarian. So this is gonna make this even more interesting. So stay tuned for our thoughts on Severance season 2 coming up next. All right, people, podcast number 2 of the morning. And I think it's safe to say this is the one that everybody was waiting for, was looking forward to. Severance season 2, another show that we had to wait 3 years for it to come back. But man, it looks like that really was worth the wait, because I don't think I've ever seen this much of a wait between shows where people were like, the anticipation increase with each other. I think probably the last time that this happened was with Succession, between seasons 2 and 3, where we had to wait like 2 years, with COVID in between. So I'm back with Luke and first timer to the show, Devin Carnahan, another good friend of mine, aka DJ Airbud. So Devin, real quick before we get this started, would you say this is your new favorite show ever?
I can't say that yet. I definitely still have Better Call Saul over this.
Okay.
And probably Breaking Bad still.
Okay.
I know that's flip-flopped for a lot of people. A lot of people have Breaking Bad over Better Call Saul, but this is I told Eli last night that this might be my favorite story ever, for sure.
Okay.
So we're getting there, but it's only 2 seasons, so I can't say that yet.
Yeah, definitely. I'm interested to get more into that once we get into the show. Luke, you finished it this morning about an hour before we started with Lost, and you had a rather controversial take beforehand.
Yeah, so I was a little late to this one, as I am with most TV, but I catch up eventually. I guess the hype got to me a little. Is that it's definitely good, but it's not maybe to the levels that a lot of the general public have claimed it to be. But we'll have that conversation in a little bit.
I love that this is the setup for this episode. This automatically makes it great. All of this and more on today's episode of the Talkin TV podcast. Stay tuned. All right, guys. So I feel like we need to start off this conversation by kind of wondering, like, kind of how this show ended up becoming a thing, which is where we got to start with Apple TV Plus and kind of the weirdness within which that streaming service started, where it's basically you have all these different companies that are getting into the streaming service game. Apple is like, okay, we have all the technology. We're just going to make a streaming service. And it starts off like you've got like some interesting like niche different shows. They seem to be taking more of like an HBO approach. Their big kind of flagship show during COVID is Ted Lasso. And then they've got a couple of interesting different programs on there. They have C with Jason Momoa. They've got For All Mankind. They've had a couple. They've got The Morning Show, which is another kind of a smash hit. But you have this show that premieres in spring of 2022. So it's still kind of during that weird phase where we're coming out of COVID and we're not quite sure what to admit. For me, I know what suckered me in was two things. It was Ben Stiller doing the show because I'm like, okay, Ben Stiller to me is a much better creator than an actor. Cable Guy, Tropic Thunder, Secret Life of Walter Mitty, like the first Zoolander. The dude is he also previously had experience doing TV with the Escape at Dannemora miniseries with Benicio del Toro and Paul Dano and Patricia Arquette, who would eventually work on who would reprise or who would be playing Harmony Cobell in this show. And so him, and then you got the cast, which at the time, the only announced cast members were Adam Scott, John Turturro, Christopher Walken, and Patricia Arquette. And automatically, I'm in. I don't even care what the show was about. I'm in, because that talent is enough to sucker me in. And that was during the days where, like, talent could actually still be a reason for why you would want to get into something new. And then you actually get into the premise of the show, which is like, okay, it's these bunch of company workers who work for this very strange company that you don't really know what it is, but they seem to like be more than just like a regular company. They've got kind of this weird, long overreach. They seem to be into like some weird, dirty stuff. There's like some conspiracy things going on. Nobody really talks the way that normal people do, but the biggest kind of source of intrigue of this show is the technical device of which it is surrounding, the title, Severance, which is this surgical procedure that these workers go through in which they develop a completely separate personality, completely independent of their outside personality. So basically, whenever you enter the company, you go down the elevator to the severed floor, your brain splits in two and you become this entirely separate person. That is still you, but you retain none of your memories from outside. You still kind of have the experiences that you do as a normal human being. You know what sex is, but you've never had sex before. You know how to drive a car, but you've never driven a car before. So it's kind of this different, weird sort of like really interesting kind of narrative device within which to examine it. Chris and I talked about this when the show first premiered, and we thought that, it was kind of a cool little interesting experiment. It was kind of a takedown, if you will, of the current corporate America strategy of, just wanting to turn people into drones. Don't think about what it is that you're doing company-wise. Just sit down, keep your head down, and do your work. And kind of inevitably how, workers always end up like, in most movies you see workers end up finding out that the companies that they work for are up to something nefarious. So this is kind of like a little bit of an interesting takedown of that. But now that it's been enough time, now that we've gotten into season 2 after a rather interesting first season, you have now, like, I guess we're kind of at that phase now where now that I guess the regular viewing public has gotten a chance to kind of know more about and find out and have enough time to catch up on the show and get more into it. Now we're getting into what I call the lore phase, And Luke, it's so interesting that, we're watching this right out off the back of our most recent Lost episode that we just recapped, which, we're recapping every week, is the fact that it kind of is interesting how these two seasons are complementing each other. Where season 1, again, it's kind of the origin. We're kind of being led into this world. We're kind of understanding how it works. And now this season, now that we've had a chance to kind of understand it, now we're getting into like the whole more like, okay, what is Lumen? What are they really up to? Kind of getting more into the dividing line between the innies and the outies, starting to figure out more about some of the secondary characters, figuring out what exactly is going on at Lumen. What are they up to? What is the whole purpose for the severance procedure? And we get some answers, just not in the way that we were expecting. Again, a very, very common thing that we see with Lost, as you have said more times than I can count. You know, you get one question answered and you have 3 more or 5 more or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said with Lost, I feel like maybe this is like the real idea that they had, like story wise, outside of the inny-outy concept, and they just had to do the first season to get here because established characters, established relationships, and whatnot. And now you can finally get to the what is it, the meat of the stuff. Yeah, I think that's what this season was. Um,
Yeah, the meat and potatoes of the story, if you will. Exactly. So, Devin, so first time of the podcast, first time of the show. Walk us through your because I know you pretty well enough. I know that when you lock onto a show, that you're like, oh, this is like your whole world becomes about the show, just based on what I know about you. So walk me through kind of how you were introduced to the show and like your thought process as you were watching it, getting more into it.
Absolutely. So, I'd heard about it, I think, from you, and a lot of your recommendations I put on the back burner for sure. I should
I'll
probably
put
stop
it on
doing
the
that.
list.
Yeah, exactly. It's a long list. I have minimal time. But I think I heard I'd seen like clips of it, especially I saw the Ben Stiller thing he did in Grand Central.
Yep.
And I was like, what the hell is going on? Like, so Eli had started playing it downstairs, and I'm like, is that Severance? And he's like, yeah. So I was like, all right, I'll see what it's about. First episode, I mean, 10 minutes in, I'm like, what is going on here? So for sure got hooked very quickly. Unfortunately, I didn't have to wait the 3 years to watch season 2. So uh, yeah, I'm hooked now, and I'm ready to dive into it for sure.
Must be nice is all that I'm gonna say. This is
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
the problem with getting invested in TV now, as I've been telling so many people around us. It's like, yeah, you'll get really into a show and you'll love it, and then the season will end and you'll be wanting more, and you'll be waiting 2, 3, sometimes up to 4 years between seasons now in the new COVID era because productions are insanely high now. Post-production process and the amount of especially with a lot of the amount of visual effects work on a lot of the bigger budget shows that come in. You have a lot of cast members that are also movie stars, so they'll go off and sometimes do a movie in between. And especially when you look at the talent that the show has nailed. I mean, John Turturro, Christopher Walken, these are movie star level actors. And it's still insane to me seeing them interact with guys like Adam Scott, who's become like a little bit of a household name, I feel like. But again, I feel like we still kind of associate him with Ben Wyatt from Parks and Rec and a decent amount of the indie movies that he's seen. And then you also are seeing, but you're also seeing it kind of, as a way to discover new talent like Zach Cherry and Britt Lauer, who have been on a million things up until this point, but this is the first time where you're actually getting to know them as their respective characters. And for me, obviously, the scene fucking stealer, Tremel Tillman is Seth Milchick. Oh my God. Like, I don't know where they found this guy. I don't know where this guy has been. I don't know, like, kind of what the thought process that was going through the writers' heads when they were writing this character. Where, again, Milchick is, I don't even know how to describe it, where basically, again, the idea of the company man who knows that he's being shit on and knows that he is just a tool to be used to control the workers, but still just delights and revels in the strangeness and the bizarreness of everything going on at Lumen. Like, he just relishes in any ability that he has to like exert his control. And whenever they just throw in a random musical number where he gets a chance to shine and show off, this is the second time that they've done it across. I'm like, okay, so is every season of Severance gonna end with a massive long instrumental number, between the smooth jazz at the end of season 1 and now the marching band, which has already become an iconic hit. Like, you're already seeing like they're trying to recreate it and stuff. Like, I don't even know where to begin. Like, I have a list of points to go off of. But I think a good point to kind of start with is this is my first in a long list of points that I want to get through in terms of covering both the events of this finale and really the entire season 2 as a whole, which is that what the hell is the show about? Like, obviously, again, I feel like I have a certain grasp as far as what it's going for metaphorically, but like actually storylines, like what this show is about. Like, we know certain things, right? We know that each of the workers that have chosen to be severed have done it for a reason, usually related to a trauma, right? Mark, because he believed that his wife Gemma was dead. Dylan, obviously, because he kind of felt inadequate in the real world. Helly, who was revealed to be Helena Egan, she's revealed to be kind of a member of this secret cabal that's controlling the company. And Irving, who is really the only one that I'd say we really haven't found out a whole lot about his outer life, but we can venture to guess based off his interactions with Bert in real life that he's been with this company for several years. He has been, possibly severed or, as is rumored to have been hinted at, cloned multiple times throughout this. So I don't know, Luke. We'll start with you. Like, what is the show about? What do we think the show is really about? What do we think it's grasping at? I have certain ideas, certain theories, but overall, like, I'm still trying to figure out like what the hell the show is even about. Because I'm lost. Pun intended.
Yeah. Before I watched it, my understanding was okay. It's some kind of virtual reality thing. They clock in for work and then they clock out. So it was semi kind of that. And I was okay. It's a metaphor for work and how you just kind of drone in your way and then go out. And then I watched it. I'm like, okay, it's like a fascinating concept, and I think it's a victim of its own creativity that it becomes so much about the concept that it's not really about the characters as much. And that's kind of like the opposite of Lost, where it is there's the concept of the island, but then it's really focusing on the characters. And this, it's so much on the concept. And like you said, what's the story? Like we kind of get more of it in the second half of season one, where the innies are trying to break out. And then I don't even know what you call this one. It's the kind of getting Gemma out.
Yeah,
Right?
this is
But
I would say that again, this is the getting Gemma season, basically, where the season one ends with the revelation that Mark's wife Gemma, who he had thought was dead this entire season, it's revealed that this other character, this kind of the company's I guess psychiatrist, Mrs. Casey, portrayed by Deacon Lockman, is actually his wife, and that's the revelation. And then once that happens, this season kind of starts with Innie Mark running throughout the walls of Lumen in order to try and find her, and then kind of as an incentive in order to, because again, it's real. Lumen needs Mark to complete whatever this Cold Harbor case file project is. And Mark won't do it until he has his team back, because they disappear kind of Helly, Dylan, and Irving, and then they bring them back. And that kind of ends up getting us into the events of season one, where they're kind of in this, back and forth thing of where it's like, oh, we need to find Gemma since we now know that she's alive. We're still trying to figure out kind of what the hell Lumen is and what it's up to. And it's also this weird thing of Lumen's kind of letting them do whatever they want, but not really. They're very purposefully keeping them away from certain of the hints that would lead them to where Gemma is, because Gemma is no longer anywhere near them in the company floor. So that's kind of, again, like the setup for the season is this season overall. There was a lot that this season was playing with, which again is, because I understand that, Luke, you're not the only one that had problems with this season in comparison to season one, because you're right. Now that the world, for lack of a better word, has gotten bigger, which is still kind of insane because we still have really only been inside this building. We really haven't explored a whole lot outside. Look, we get vague
even
hints.
the outside world is so almost artificial.
Yes,
in a
yes.
way. So, and that goes to the whole show how it is shot, because it, like, seeing Lost, you're like, okay, the shots aren't really as deeply thought out here. Like, every shot is
Yes, it's
meticulously
very, very meticulous. And
thought
again,
out, like,
there's a reason why they have kept us in this kind of very small, isolated, snowy town. We don't even know where we know where it's shot. It was shot relatively close to where I grew up in upstate New York, but we don't actually know where like this takes place within the physical world. We don't really know what time period we're in. Like I don't think they've ever once mentioned what year it is or anything like that. Like, we really don't know what it is. Devin, so what are your thoughts in terms of what you think kind of this show is about? And like, what are some of your theories here?
I think it has a lot to do with how important it is to just kind of live through your traumas instead of kind of burying them. I think it kind of touches on the stages of grief a lot, especially with Mark coming to realize whether it's because he needs something or not. Uh, the realization kind of step of pain, like maybe if he were to just live this through, things would have been maybe easier. Um, Obviously, probably wouldn't have known Gemma was taken, but I think maybe, Lumen would have kind of, I mean, we don't really know how he got to the company,
Right.
I guess, so to speak. So maybe they approached him, maybe they needed him to come, whatever. But uh, I truly think it might boil down to just a creative twist on the stages of grief, and maybe we see that play out more into season 3, but it could just be, Ben Stiller having a grand old time.
It could
And,
be.
you know, but I don't get caught up on what it's about right now, like to the greatest extent, because I'm just ready to, you know, uh
You're just kind of like, you're just so still in the vibe
yeah,
of the show that you're
yeah,
like,
yeah. I don't know. It's a I want to touch on the vagueness that you touched on about the
yeah,
outside world for
yeah,
sure. Uh, the cars being from maybe the late 80s and
right,
yet using cell phones. It's like cell phones as in like modern day cell phones. And the only years that we saw were from Irving's paperwork that he had in his chest, 2007 to 2009.
right,
But God knows what year it is now. But I
yeah,
mean, we're kind of following that chronology. So the cars don't make sense for the time period at least. So I think they're purposely kind of keeping it vague to kind of keep you not connected to the world right
right,
now.
right,
So maybe we get answers on that, but
right.
it might be purposeful.
Yeah, which if anything, I feel like that's a metaphor. I feel like, again, for the show itself, where again Lumen's whole purpose seems to again be keep all of both its workers, except for the people at the very very top, and kind of everybody living in the immediate vicinity, just as vague and as disconnected and as uninformed as everything that is going on. It's spot on with that as far as that goes. I wanted to touch on real quick the point that you brought up, the whole idea of Mark Scout versus Mark S, because if anything, I feel like the biggest takeaway from this season, now that it's wrapped, is this is the season that really gets into the nitty gritty of, okay, the innies are becoming more aware of their outies and vice versa. And so I think one of the most interesting points about this episode specifically is this is the first episode where we see Mark Scout directly having a conversation with Mark S, which up until this point has not happened. We've had some, and also in a weird way, that was another thing that I noticed about this episode as well, is this episode you had another multiple conversations between characters, innies and their outies, with Dylan's innie reading the note from his outie, as far as when he originally wanted to retire and essentially kill himself, because as they see, once you're out of Lumen and you're severed, that innie goes bye-bye, and there's like kind of no conception of it, which also gets into so many questions that I have about like life and death and like what that actually means within this universe as well, because that has just been taken to a whole new level. And we also saw the conversation where Helena Egan was having the conversation with her Annie Helly R. And I feel like that's where we get the biggest difference between, kind of the characters, where, Helena Egan is this very, kind of corporate controlled, monotone, essentially drone there to do her father and as a result, the Egan family and Lumen's bidding, versus Helly R is this very kind of vivacious, independent, wants to know what's going on, very much needs answers to everything, is not in a manner of kind of keeping anything down. And hence, she even made the speech when, kind of the overtime contingency was triggered in the season 1 finale. And you see her addressing that entire group of people. And it's her innie. And she basically is addressing what it is to actually live life as an innie on the severed floor. But kind of what's so interesting about the revelations that came from this past episode and the interactions between Mark Scout and Mark S is the fact that, the outies kind of treat the innies and take them for granted, which is a really interesting dichotomy that you wouldn't expect. I was listening to a podcast the other day that I think it was very humorous how this was covered, but I thought the points that they brought up were really interesting, where basically the idea is that we have this thing with TV where whenever we see quote unquote like multiple factions of who we perceive as good characters, we automatically assume that they would be on the same side if they're placed in the same room, in the same setting, same scenario. And that's usually not the case. I believe they called this the Daenerys Targaryen fallacy, where just because we assume that Daenerys is a quote-unquote good guy, Jon Snow and the rest of them in Westeros are quote-unquote good guys, they would naturally are gonna align when they meet. And they do for a certain amount of time, but then things end up going the way that they do. And so I think that's kind of an interesting point of comparison for here, where Mark Scout, all he wants is Gemma back, right? But also, up until this point, he thought that Gemma was dead. And also, we don't know the circumstances kind of around why he even went to Lumen. Obviously, we can assume that it had something to do with, it is revealed in this season that he signed up for it after the revelation that Gemma died. But we don't know what Lumen had to do with that as well. And also you have the fact that, Mark S., who does not have the same sort of connection to Gemma that Mark Scout does, kind of coming to terms with and realizing that, oh, you're just trying to use me to accomplish this thing for you, that I don't necessarily have the same kind of for this person, that I don't have the same kind of connection with. To you, she's your wife, but to me, she's just this caseworker. And meanwhile, Mark has also developed this relationship with Helly R as well. So it leads to, again, the mic drop of all mic drop endings, where they manage to get Gemma out, but right when he gets her out and she reverts from Miss Casey back to Gemma, Mark Scout is still Mark S. And instead of joining her in the outside world, he walks away from her and rejoins Helly R inside. And I'm just like, it's breaking my brain in two, quite literally, as far as that goes. So, Devin, I just wanted your thoughts on, like, what did you think of, like, kind of that revelation of, like, oh, like, the outies and the innies are not necessarily on the same side and want different things. It's kind of like the new dynamic that adds to Severance.
Well, imagine being just created out of nowhere. I mean, there's probably some self-hatred from his outie, or from his innie towards his outie. I mean, this is the first time they've had a conversation, and he doesn't really care, right? He just wants something from him, and he flat out says that. He's like, so now you want something? That's when you decide to check in on me, basically. And I think Helly's character played it out the best, like, what the hell? Why would she do this to me? And I think obviously they've all thought about that. They've all think that, and this is the first time where he's ready. He's meeting that decision on whether he owes anything to his physical body, So the show did it brilliantly. I have no notes on that, but I think it's interesting, kind of like the public perception on Mark's decision to not walk out the door. He did everything he was asked. He wasn't asked to come back out with her. He's his own person. He's got to stick up for himself at some point. So I applaud any Mark's decision. I mean, he risked his physical life to save this woman that he has honestly no connection with, besides her being, like you said, the Miss Casey. So, I mean, he did more than he had to do. And assuming Gemma gets out, reconnects with Devin and Cobell, they can fill her in. Uh, Devin trusts, or Casey, or Gemma, sorry, trusts, or not Cobell, but
all these names, it gets complicated.
Yeah.
They get mixed together.
You get the train of thought that I'm going on. So I saw some things like, there's no way Gemma could know that Mark works for Lumen because she's been gone this whole time. So she just saw, and there might be an insinuation that Gemma knows Helena. Maybe she was part of the process of when she was brought in. So Gemma might have hatred for Helena because she had kept her prisoner for this long, and she just saw her husband run away with the woman that's been imprisoning her for 2 years. So that'll be interesting. But like I said, Mark's got to stick up for himself at some point. He's a 2-year-old person locked inside of a, let's say, early 40-year-old man's body. So of course his decisions aren't going to be the most thought out and rational. Where the hell are they going to go? What are they going to do? But yeah, he's got to do something. So
yeah, and especially going into the whole Devin Cobell dynamic there. I've got a lot of questions there as far as that goes, because I'm sorry, Devin seemed just a little bit too eager to call Cobell. I still don't fully trust Cobell, even though, like, my whole thing is I can trust that she's definitely angry at Lumen, and considering that her entire family, as we saw in her solo episode this season, dedicated their entire lives to Lumen, and the way that she was just so kind of quickly passed over with and disregarded. So I do trust that she wants to get back at Lumen for that, but I still don't fully trust her because I still don't know what her agenda is. I don't know what her involvement was with Gemma's disappearance. Like, there's still so much. It feels like the lost comparison is so apt, because I feel like for as much as we found out in this season, there's so much that we need answers to. Luke, just what are your thoughts just in general on kind of the whole, again, as we've been watching Lost, the whole mystery box element of it, and the fact that in general, the problem with mystery box shows that we've had in the past before is the mystery is always inherently more interesting than the answers. And it feels like by the time we finally start to get the answers, the mystery has been built has been so well built up that by the time we get answers, we're like, oh, and it's never kind of going to measure up to that. So I wanted to know where your head was at as far as all that
Yeah,
is.
I'm looking at this. I'm worrying like, oh, they're really building up this Lumen thing. Like,
Yeah,
what the
it's
hell
a
is it?
worry.
Especially with this modern audience that we have. Like that was Lost. That was the
The
early
early
2010s,
2000s, yeah, the
the
early
pre
internet days.
social media explosion. Now
Yeah,
TikTok and everything. So I'm gonna be there for that definitely. Um, but on the season as a whole, like yeah, the innie outie relationship definitely grew in this season, and because to me, like I'm watching them, they refer to each other as different people, but as the audience, it's the same person. So just thinking about that's a whole interesting point there. Um, and then you had the scene with Mark talking to himself through little videotapes. I thought that was really good. And then they start off like, hey, we're gonna merge or whatever, and then they realize that
right.
hey, we have very different motivations here. And then, of course, that leads to the ending, which, thanks to Mark, we can have a season 3. That's how I see it, because you have to do something like that. But it also makes sense dramaturgically, if to use Jeremy Strong's quote after that one Succession episode, we're talking about an interview. But anyway, yeah, use the mystery box, but I think time is gonna run out eventually because we know seasons don't go for 6, 7, 8 seasons anymore. I think
Right. Yeah,
maybe
that's the other issue also. I don't see this going past 4 seasons. Like, I
yeah.
would be shocked if this were to go past 4 seasons. I was even telling Eli the other day, Devin, that I'm like, I could see them wrapping this up all in 3 seasons. He's like, nah, there's too much mystery. They would need at least 2 more. So it literally could go either way. I'm not quite sure which of the two it would be. Another character dynamic that I wanted to touch on really quick. Helena versus Helly, because season 1, because I feel like that's the biggest difference that we got between seasons 1 and 2 is that season 1, the only real outie that we got to spend time with was Mark, really. This season we got to see going off the finale of season 1, we got to spend more time with all the characters outies. Irving with Helly, with Dylan. For me, the biggest thing is what's it called was Helena versus Helly, and how after the revelation at the end of last season that Helena was that Helly's outie Helena was not only somebody who worked for the company, so that made her sort of an insider to begin with, but was also she was one of the head honchos. She's directly related to the Egan family. She is an Egan. She's James Egan's, I believe is his name, daughter. And so we see several scenes of her in the beginning of this season outside of the severed floor. And it has come to be revealed in the first half of the season, she is still Helena, not Helly, infiltrating them at the beginning of the season before the kind of the OBR, the retreat episode, in which Irving exposes her and is fired as a result. So I mean that whole episode in general, and it's funny because I saw that episode and immediately I went up like, oh, this is their Pine Barrens episode from The Sopranos. But that whole episode really was kind of, episode 4 was the beginning of kind of what this season was really going to entail. So, Devin, what are your thoughts on kind of the whole Helena versus Helly of it all? What kind of the differences, and almost kind of, once Helena is forced to become Helly once again, which is something that she said she would not do again. What do you think the repercussions of that are going to be going forward? And as far as like kind of her being Helena, I mean, not Helly, being swayed by both her innie and her kind of interactions and observations of everything that's been happening, how that could sway her to go against her family and Lumen and side with her innie, perhaps.
I think they've got a lot of similarities actually, which is it's kind of hard to kind of wrap my head around her character, especially since we have so limited screen time of Helena. Um, she is very hard. Um, I mean, I think 209, you kind of start to see the relationship, like the physical relationship of her with her father.
Yes.
Her eating the egg very
Oh,
slowly.
oh man, that
Terrible
scene.
scene, man. It's hard to watch. Um, uh, Obviously, she is not filling the shoes she needs to and her father is seeing that. You get that in the start of 210 as well, when James talks to Helly. I don't see Kira in her, I see it in you. And I think that it's maybe anxiety blocking Helena not being able to fulfill her duties. So she might run away, try to get away from the Egan family altogether, and maybe reintegration is on her doorstep. I don't know. Her character's very in the dark for me, at least. I can't wrap my head around it. I have a million theories, but I'm sure we'll get into that. But uh, albeit a very interesting character, I do feel like she might be on the back burner, especially with some of the other relationships that are kind of forming right now. She might be one of those ones that just sneaks up and then out of nowhere you're like, whoa, forgot about that. So
Yeah.
uh, interesting character dynamic between the two. I mean, I feel like it was more profound in season one. Season two, um, Helly just kind of starts doing her thing. So uh, I don't really have much more to say on that.
Well, I guess what's kind of so interesting there is the fact that we don't see Helly for the first half of season 2. We don't see her
Sure.
until episode 5. So there's an entire chunk of the season where we're seeing Helena pretending to be Helly. And even that creates a whole different dynamic because, like I said, everybody like Mark and Dylan don't notice it as much, but Irving immediately is like suspicious of it. It's like something's not right here, and then figures it out in episode 4. And obviously again, based off the fact of like we as the audience are clued into it by the fact that she completely lies about what she saw because she's unable to replicate Helly's experience of on seeing the outside because it's not Helly. And then for me, the most kind of telling thing was I believe it was in episode 6 when she runs into Mark Scout in the Chinese restaurant and she's got that look of fascination on her face of it's like, okay, we know this is Helena, but it is quite interesting how again Helly is the one who was kind of formed this romantic attachment to Mark S. But it is quite interesting how she as well seems to be kind of forming this connection, this attachment to Mark as well, and kind of whether that there may be more of a connection between the innies and the outies that we may have been led to believe. This may have been based off the prior experience, because the other thing too also is that it's Helena that sleeps with Mark S during the retreat episode, not Helly. So that, and they even talk about that too later on, where Helly is like, "Oh my God, my body was kind of hijacked by my outie, to perform this act, this task that I wanted. That was supposed to be my experience." So that's kind of also creating a dividing edge. But Devin, that sequence that you were talking about as well, the scene with the eggs, that's again kind of an indicator as well, where it's like, with the relationship with their father, with James, where he's like, I saw the fire of Kier. I used to see it in you. Now it's kind of gone out, but now I see it in your innie. And that kind of ties into another theory about the innies and the outies as well, which is where obviously once the chip is put in their head, once they undergo the severance procedure, some of the ideas that I've been hearing about is that the innies could be like, quote unquote, the most pure versions of yourself, right? So basically, in order to break it down to layman's terms, it's like, so you have like your base personality that you have when you're born, and then it's kind of, becomes changed based off of whether you go with the nature or the nurture approach, basically dealing with the weight of the world essentially, and how you kind of become, your real personality, quote unquote, becomes a version of that based off of, your interactions with the world and the world's influences on you and such. But if you could kind of take that base personality and place it inside of an adult body, free of kind of the world weariness, the weight of the world, free of having to do with bills, having to do with relationships, having to do with trauma, essentially, like you were talking about. And if kind of your innie is like that base version of yourself, right? It creates this really, really interesting dynamic and difference between kind of, what the real you is, and they've even made play of that with the title of some of the episodes, the you are, essentially, the I am. What is your real self? Is it your innie? Is your outie? Is it really that completely different? Is it a completely different person, or is it just yourself? And it also kind of draws invitation as well to what the idea of death is and its presentation in this show and how that's changed. Because obviously, when your innie, quote unquote, dies, it's almost like a program that's being deactivated. You still physically are alive. You still have your outie, but like your innie self, quote unquote, is gone, because for all intents and purposes, Irving's innie is gone, was killed. And that's what kind of made the ending of that episode so kind of profound and hit it as hard as it did. But Irving's Audi is still alive. He's shown to have been investigating Lumen for quite a while now. So it brings up these interesting questions, as well. Because also the other thing too, also that was so interesting about the finale is the fact that they explicitly stated multiple times that the reason why they needed to rescue Gemma was because of Mark being very, very close to completing Cold Harbor. And they said, okay, when Mark completes Cold Harbor, Gemma will be killed. But what does that mean? Would her Innie be killed? Would her physical body be destroyed? So it brings up all these different questions as well, as far as with the Innies versus the Audi struggle as well. And it also kind of ties into the whole wonders of it's are they even going to bother to answer any of the questions that the show has been set up, or since we're now kind of focused on this whole Audis versus Innies struggle that has been kind of brought to light with this season finale, So it's a lot that the show still has to grapple with. And again, I really, really do have to give credit to the writers for still being able to make the show as complex and dense as it is without giving us any straightforward answers. Luke, what are your thoughts on all that? I know I just rambled kind of a bunch there, but what are your thoughts on the whole kind of Innie versus Audi struggle, kind of what is death, quote unquote, in the show? What does that even mean, really?
Yeah, I'm just wondering what the final equation of that will be. The Innie versus Audi struggle. Will they become one person, or will there be some kind of I don't know, cloning situation where they each become their own physical person? I wasn't really sure what the meant like this is the 25th file, the final file.
Right.
So has he been making 24 versions of Gemma?
Right, exactly. And then you have what
didn't-
Cobell is saying with the whole it's the 25th file that you've been working on with Gemma, but I also don't know if Cobell's telling the truth because I don't trust her as far as I can throw her. So
Yes, I'm choosing to trust the writers that they have some idea of what they. I don't need them to have all the answers. I'm
Right.
not expecting. I've watched enough mystery shows and things. We're watching Lost. I have to get ready to be maybe disappointed in some things.
Yeah.
And the same with this. So I trust them to handle it to the best of their abilities. I'm wondering what the general public's reception might be to the like we talked about earlier. But
Yeah.
I'm really interested in the Audi dynamic and what their final solution for that will be.
Yeah, the general public's reaction to the show has been fascinating, to say the least, because it's just, to my knowledge, first of all, the monoculture died with Game of Thrones, so, we don't really have kind of these shows come out now where everybody is gravitating towards them and everyone is talking about it. We just don't have those types of shows anymore. Kind of every show has its own, specific niche, so I guess kind of it's really interesting as to how the general public has really latched onto the show, and really I've seen a lot of people watching it who I would not have expected to be into it as well. Also, the fact that for a show that is this complex and this deep and has this many mysteries and or rather lack of answers, how people have been able to really grasp onto that. It really, I guess, shows that if you provide a good mystery, people will be willing to latch onto it, regardless of the idea of potentially being disappointed, or having another Lost, or even worse, more egregious than Lost, it has to be a Westworld scenario where Westworld, it feels just straight up gave up on its mysteries. It was okay, now we're just going to become a completely different show for the second half, and it's so much so that they ended up canceling it. But yeah, it is interesting, I guess, kind of, the whole wonder as far as which direction kind of the show is going to go in, and where the writers are going to take it after that finale, where it's okay, are they going to bother to kind of break down some more of the mystery box stuff, or are they kind of going to be so fearful of that they're just going to kind of stay away from it and continue to be in this kind of weird half space, continuing to explore Lumen and having it stay with the characters and their individual conflicts, and how are they going to try and take down Milchick this week? Because again, just seemingly, because the other thing too also is that as mysterious as this show is, there were just certain storylines this season that it felt like they just dropped, the Miss Wong arc and whatever the hell that was, where it's all of a sudden you have this pre-teenage girl just working there, and then who has this somewhat back and forth kind of antagonistic relationship with Milchick, and then she's just gone. Milchick's okay, your tenure's over, bye-bye, see ya, get on this Lumen bus off to God only knows where. And then
I love Milchick so much.
Milchick's the best. If there is one great takeaway from this show, Tremel Tillman, he is so good that Tom Cruise basically hand-selected him to be in the next Mission Impossible movie. We haven't seen him in any of the trailers. Yes, he is. Damn. He is on the cast list.
My anticipation just went even more.
I figured as much. I figured you were going to enjoy that when I told you about that. But also the whole Burt, oh my God, I almost double said that. The whole Burt Irving storyline post Irving's Innie being deactivated and where that goes, and where it's like, okay, are they setting this up for something, or but then it ends with like just Burt putting Irving on a train and telling him to never come back, and that's again, it's like Christopher Walken is a little bit older, I believe he's like in his 80s now, so he doesn't obviously have that much longevity to go. Anything can happen if they were to wait another 3 years before we get the next season, but also it's the fact of I have a feeling that they didn't know if they were going to be able to get John Turturro after this season, so they kind of wrote the storyline to go in a specific direction as to where, okay, he could come back, but if he doesn't, this will kind of be the end of it. And I get that, but as far as how it was represented on screen, I'm like, I kind of almost wish that the OZR, the outside retreat was the last that we had seen of Irving, where it's like, okay, we killed Irving's innie, and like that's it. We don't see him again ever. So as much as I did kind of enjoy the hints that we kind of got as far as, what Irving was doing before Lumen and like kind of his relationship to Burt and how that's continuing and how Burt still seems to know him, even though their innies had this connection and like kind of all the things that were going with that very weird dinner conversation that where we saw, Burt's husband Fields portrayed by John Noble, Denethor from Lord of the Rings. But yeah, I just that was one storyline where I'm like, oh, this is kind of, they're not sure if they're going to be able to get John Turturro. That was kind of the whole like outside the show kind of sneaking its way in. Also, Dylan, I will admit, Dylan's storyline this season, well, very, very interesting in terms of like us getting to know Audi Dylan a little bit after the revelations last season, the fact of it's this, and that also kind of ties in as well, the whole whether your innie is like your real true self, how his wife, who we see for the first time this season, portrayed by Merritt Weaver, is almost like re-falling in love with her husband, but it's not really the man that she married, or was it? Maybe this is the man that she fell in love with before kind of everything that happened, to Audi Dylan happened, and kind of how that resolves itself where he gets kind of his courage back, if you will, where he kind of becomes a little bit deflated at the end of the season, but he kind of gets his courage back and ends up coming back to help Helly trap Milchick in the bathroom. And I don't know, that was another storyline where it's like, okay, it kind of felt like they didn't really, they weren't really sure where they wanted to take this ultimately. So I don't know, Devin, what are your thoughts on Irving and Dylan's storylines and where they kind of went this season?
I thought the exact same thing with Irving. I felt like it was a vague ending just in case they couldn't get him back. I was telling Eli about that. He's like, "Oh no, they'll just make a storyline of him elsewhere so we can see the rest of the outside world." I'm like, that maybe that's what they do if they do get him back. Or his character might be done, but his arc is not. That work I feel like might end up in Cobell's hands. She might know about it already, so she might, uh, carry on whatever he was doing. We really don't know what he was doing. Obviously, investigating them, staying up to try to maybe naturally kind of reintegrate, because maybe in the dream kind of sense, uh, thing, your mind kind of wanders, connects some dots. I mean, we know he knows about the hallway. We're insinuating that that's probably from him dreaming. Uh, but, as far as Dylan, I do like the nature versus nurture thing here, because she does say that this, it reminds me of what you used to be. So Dylan not being able to be natured or nurtured at all, besides getting his finger traps and waffle parties, his personality is going to kind of remain stagnant. Whereas in the outside world, you have all of these influencers, all these hardships. It's uh, it's quite possible that this, like you said, the severance procedure might bring you back to like a basis, just like kind of what you are before everything influences you. So I think that's what we get from Dylan's character, and I think that's kind of what the insinuation is. That's what they're trying to portray. Um, so that's where I think Dylan's character is. Besides his bouncing loyalty to whether he cares about himself or not, Helly uses the same argument to try to keep him that he used to try to keep Irving. So I mean, he reacted irrationally maybe. Um, the thing with Irving's character that I also want to touch on, I just remembered, is that the love kind of transcended the severance, kind
Yes.
of after that. So maybe there's emotions that kind of do just linger in people. And I think Audi Mark said it to Any Mark. He's like, I created you to kind of take the pain out of myself and, to not burden you. But he's like, you still feel it down there. So emotion, whether it relates to the tempers or not, might not be able to transcend the severance chip. You just might not be able to rationalize it. And I think Irving staying up, blasting the rock music, painting with his dog, I think that might be him trying to naturally reintegrate, remember more, and his daydreaming at work being the black paint or the black is I think that's another hint at that. So those characters are very, very, very interesting. Definitely well thought out. Nothing's an accident with them. So I just love all of the character development of season two. Just kind of like not giving you a lot, but kind of kind of leading you to a direction of thought. So I
Yes.
think that's better than them just being like, "Oh, this is what this is. This is what this is." And
Yeah,
it's definitely a natural progression of figuring it out yourself, which is what I love
definitely.
about this show.
Definitely. And also, especially once Irving's kind of, suspicions of the black hallway, how that was revealed, as far as kind of being this separate section, than the severed floor, as far as, kind of where Cold Harbor is being developed. I have another question, like, what the fuck is Cold Harbor? But that kind of ties into another couple points that I want to bring up, as well as, getting into the finale and what that actually is and kind of, the theorizing as far as what Lumen actually is and what they're actually up to. But really kind of my last thing that I wanted to touch on itself. I was, we talked about Mark S's final decision to ultimately rejoin Helly and kind of where that's going to bring us going into season 3. I want to talk about Cobell for a second because again, Cobell largely absent as well from this season. I still don't trust her as far as I throw her. And I don't know if that's just because of the way that Patricia Arquette portrays that character. Obviously, again, we saw a little bit more of her as far as, we understand that her family has this like kind of lifelong servitude to Severance as well. There were perchance there were hints at the fact that she was originally the originator of the Severance procedure, that maybe, that the Lumens were and the Egans were trying to work on some way of, whatever the hell they were trying to do. And she was the one that came up with this procedure in terms of a manner of what, how important it is to them. Again, the theory, the widespread theory that I had heard is that, that Damon Lindelof, ironically, the creator of Lost as well, was theorizing about was that it was not actually innies and outies that we were seeing, that it was clones, and that every time you went down the elevator, that previous version of you was like burned up and such. But I didn't necessarily buy too much into that theory as well, especially now since we see when Mark goes down the elevator with Drummond, and we literally actually see the shift. There's no cuts or anything. We stay in that shot with him as he shifts from innie Mark to outie Mark. Then it results in him shooting Drummond in what is probably the funniest scene of this entire show, when Drummond is just like gurgling up blood before he falls out of the elevator. Like, I was audibly laughing at that. But it kind of ties into all kind of ties together as far as, do we trust Cobell? What is ultimately her endgame? Why did she have such this interest in Mark that she was willing to monitor his outie self outside of Lumen? And how does that tie into potentially the Egan's endgame, as far as like, whose side is she really on? Does she want to take down the Egans and Lumen now that she's been done dirty by them, or does she still kind of have her own agenda? Luke, I wanted to start with you with that.
I think she more so has her own agenda. Funnily enough, I'm thinking of Jamie Lannister in terms of her. Like, she wants to go back to where it was, and she maybe wants to be in charge, but it's not going to end well for her. That's how I see it folding out. Whether that's next season, whether that's over the next two seasons, 3 seasons, however many they do. But yeah, I think she has her own agenda. It's hard to trust her because just like that. Like, okay, what was it, Mark and what's this her name? Devin.
Devin.
Yeah, Devin was like, "Hey, we need to call Cobell." Like, it's like,
Yeah, that's another thing too that I thought was weird. I'm like, why is Devin so quick to call Cobell, especially after she found out that she worked for Lumen last season? She just seems immediately a little bit too quick to follow her orders when Cobell kind of tells her to get out and have her talk to any Mark. Like, there was a little bit too much suspicious, like, eyebrow raisings up, being like, huh, like, what's going on here, And also as well that, you also see that weird thing happening with the sheep. We saw that, and the goats rather. We saw that earlier. Also, another Game of Thrones alumni, ironically, Gwendolyn Christie, Brienne of Tart, as well in this season. There was a theory going around that the only reason why she like saved Mark and had the fight with Drummond was because Ben Stiller and Adam Scott are both such fanboys of Game of Thrones that they wanted to see some recreation of Gwendolyn Christie beating the shit out of a much bigger guy than herself, whether that was supposed to be the personification of the Hound or the bear that she fought in the pit, whatever the case was. But we also had the stuff with the goats, and immediately that's also what made me think of cloning too, because obviously Dolly the sheep, the first ever cloned animal. So that's what I thought there, and it felt like again we were seeing the beginnings of the procedure where again we see Gemma or rather Miss Casey taking apart the baby crib, which also had Lumen Industries on the box as well. I would like to point out. Taking apart with seemingly no emotion or thought process, basically showing that like, okay, perhaps this level of the severance procedure had worked to its highest level. She has no memory of Gemma. She has no emotion about this whatsoever. And also tying into the sheep, it's like, okay, so some combination of the severance procedure and the cloning of the sheep led me to believe, I'm like, okay, they're trying to resurrect Kier Egan. That's what I thought as well. So, Devin, what are your thoughts on all of that with Cobell, the shit with the sheep? What is Lumen trying to resurrect Kier Egan? Like, what do you think is going on here?
I used to buy into the fact that I think that they're trying to resurrect Kier Egan, but I think that the finale definitely kind of pushed me away from that. It kind of gave
Okay.
me enough answers to kind of figure out, in my opinion, what they're trying to do. But first, I want to touch on Cobell. I think the safe bet is to not trust her,
Yeah.
but I feel like if you think a little bit harder, you might find a way to trust her. So Cobell, the scene right before she drives off, where she's coming back to get her job back, and they're in the parking lot. Um, you see that man take just one step right next to Helena, and she like something switches in her. She runs away.
You're talking Drummond, the big heavy set guy.
No, it was a different guy. I think that was the only thing that he was in. He doesn't
Okay.
have a name. So
Okay.
basically, just based on what Bert did, we can assume that he's the kind of corporate hitman.
Right.
So I think she might have known that, and she might have been looking for a way all these years to try to get back at James, and that might have just set her off, being like, you're gonna kill me now, just take me for the drive, basically.
Right.
So I think maybe we might be able to trust her just a tad. She probably does have her
Right.
own agenda, revenge or whatever she's
Trust
trying
her
to
as
do.
far as her own agenda is satisfied.
Yeah. So she has a history with Jane too, going back to her schooling days, being basically a child laborer. So God knows what happened
Yeah.
there. So she might have trauma from that she's trying to hash out. And the only way she's able to kind of make sure that she's safe until she's able to rebel is to remain at Lumen as a kind of authoritarian figure so they can't really do anything to her. But I think the goat stuff, just sacrificial animals. I think that they're there to kind of distract you from what actually is going
Okay.
on so they can move some stuff around and kind of be kind of just a background kind of thing. The goats just furthering the fact that they view their founder as a basic god, you know what I mean? Just thanking him and praising him for everything that they've got. Uh, I don't think that their idea is to bring back Kier, because my new theory is that he's already basically there with the board. The board's just, whatever, like a motherboard or something with
Right. Right.
all
The
of
board
their.
we don't think is actually like a
No, it's
real
not a group of
thing. Yeah.
humans. It's
Yeah.
probably just a bunch of MDR numbers plugged in, and I think Drummond kind of hints at, as many as the founder calls, with the goats and everything. So
Right.
maybe he's calling the shots behind the scenes. And I don't think in the modern world they'd have really any, besides being able to praise him to his face, any like real reason to bring him back to human form.
Right.
Uh, maybe not. So that's what I think about that. The goats just being sacrificial things, and then trusting Cobell basically as long as her agenda is not reached yet.
Yeah.
Also, another thing, we were talking about Devin just for a slight second.
Yes.
She's going to be one of those sneaky characters
Yeah.
that something big's going to happen soon. As soon as any Mark walks in the last episode, you see that big painting, and I saw a breakdown of
Right.
it. Devin's back is turned to him, and I don't know if that
Oh.
is something that's foreshadowing something, but she's the only one in the painting with her back she's kind of looking over her shoulder at Mark. So maybe there's something there, maybe there's something not. But
Okay. All right. I like this. I like this a lot, man.
It's
You
good that
you
we have someone who pays attention to
Devin,
the
you are
details.
the Severance expert right here. I love this. This is great. Oh man, let's hope we don't have to wait as long for the next season before we get you back on. Because god damn, that's the other thing too. I do not want to have to wait another fucking 3 years. Devin, I was still living in Oswego the last time that this show was on the air. That's how long it's been. So we better not have to wait as long. And I mean, they even talked about it too. It felt like every single chance they had to promote the show too. They were hamstrung by some sort of real world events. You know, they couldn't really advertise the first season or do any press for it because it was still during COVID. It was early 2022, and then the premiere of this season, they couldn't do anything for it because of the wildfires that were going on in LA at the time. So this is really their first chance that they have to like really celebrate and publicize the show. So the fact that the show is kind of matriculated as much as it has via word of mouth really shows the power of this storytelling. It shows that they really have something good going here. So real quick, before we get out of here, I want from each of you guys, I want your final thoughts on this season. I want your star rating, and I want a potential theory or direction that we could go in for season 3 when we get there. Because surprise, surprise, they've already renewed it for season 3. This is, I think, Apple said that this has been like their most watching that they've ever put out. So, Devin, starting with you, your final thoughts on this season, your star rating overall, out of 5, out of 10, whatever, I don't care, and your potential theory for season 3.
I'm gonna just get it out of the way. I thought it was a 5 out of 10. I'm just kidding. No, it was a 10 out of 10 for me. Maybe a 9.95, but I don't do the ratings. Like that's not what I am. I don't have a big enough
If only it were
basis to
that
be like,
easy.
oh, this
Yeah,
I don't do
right?
the ratings.
yeah. I don't. Yeah, ratings are subjective in my opinion. So I personally loved it. I thought it was terrific television, a breath of fresh air from what we've been getting recently. So,
Yeah.
uh, final thoughts. Any uprising. That's
Yeah.
that's the only way I think this could go, especially with that scene of like the marching band and another "fuck you, Mr. Milchick." So
Yeah.
that's terrific. Um, I don't think they're gonna kill Milchick. I think they're gonna use him.
They better
So
not kill him. They better not. He's the best
No,
character on the show.
they're gonna use him. And something I wanted to touch on with Milchick real quick is that there's a, there's something going on there. I think in the same capacity as Cobell. He might only be there to protect himself as well, because he's like the Switch Army knife, and he just backtalked the founder to his face. Albeit a wax figure, but that's not going to go over well.
Yeah.
So there's something there that he doesn't want to be a participant of this any longer, especially with his previous episode talking back to Drummond, rest in peace.
Yeah, exactly. Also, that's the other. Yeah, that back and forth with Drummond, where he's like, finally, he's like, I am not taking this shit from you anymore.
There's something with Milchick, but the drive for some reason to keep protecting this company, where he could have easily just given up in that bathroom, but he's pile driving a vending machine. So
yeah,
there's a reason he's doing something. We're gonna figure that out, or maybe not. This show's, like you said, mystery box is big, and so predictions, any uprising, I think that we get as cliche as it is, a complete 180 of, instead of Mark trying to save Gemma, we got Gemma trying to save Mark.
Ooh.
So
I like
that. That's very TV.
I like that.
Yeah, very TV. It should be fun. The wait's gonna suck, but hopefully we get some other good stuff to watch. In between there.
Fingers crossed. I mean, this beginning of 2025 has already been better than all of last year as far as TV. Between this, White Lotus, what's it called? The final 5 episodes of Cobra Kai. Dope Thief is pretty solid. Righteous Gemstones, Invincible season 3. We've also got a couple more things on the way. Last of Us season 2 is coming, and/or final season is coming. We got Daredevil is back. Also, we're eating well. We're eating well, us TV fans for now. So let's hope that
season 3 is not something you're gonna want to rush. So take your time, make sure it's done right. It won't be 3 years. That was COVID and the strikes happening.
Yes.
So
Yes, exactly. All of that. Could not agree more. Luke, your final thoughts, star ratings, and predictions for next season.
Yeah, so my general issue is the show is a slight victim of its own creativity and brilliance. It's so atmospheric that it comes disconnected from the story a little bit, as we discussed. But either way, season 2, as we said, it's the lore season. It's the diving deeper into the real gist of the show. And maybe I'm not as high on it as a lot of other people. It's still a very good season and show overall. I give it like a low 4 stars. I'm eager to see more, but I'm a little worried because it often goes season 1, and then season 2 is a little better, which I thought maybe not, and then season 3 is the lesser of the 3. I'm hoping it doesn't follow that trajectory. I will, and a theory, we get a Milchick innie, just as a
Ooh. Well, that would be interesting
as something.
because Milchick has stated at the beginning of this season when he was going around to all the outings that he had chosen to not be severed. So that he had the option to be, but that he had chosen not to. So that's interesting to say the least.
I don't know what they do with it, but maybe we get, as you said, we get the pure personality.
Right. We
so
could get
what would that look like?
Exactly. We could get the revelation that like, oh, maybe he's been an innie this entire time. Maybe there is a Milchick outie that we didn't know about. Ooh, I like that. That's good. It's doing good with these theorizing. It's been a while since we've had a show that we can actually theorize about. Okay, so my final thoughts. Love this show. Love this season. It continued to prove exactly why I fell in love with it in the first place. I still have no idea what's happening, but that's the best possible place that I could be. I don't want to know what's happening. I kind of just want to be along for the ride, along for the journey. It's fun to have a show finally for the first time in what feels like forever that we can actually like theorize about, have these conversations about, and really not know where it's going and not kind of really have a definitive sense of what's going to happen. Because that's the other thing too. This is completely original as well. This is not based off of any pre-existing material, which again, it feels like another breath of fresh air because it feels like almost every like great adaptation that we get is based off of some pre-existing IP that the people who know about the pre-existing IP are going to have a sense of where it's going before the people who are just tuning in. And so I'm glad that kind of for the first time in a while, it feels like everybody that's watching it is on the same page. I give this 4.5 out of 5, 9.5 out of 10. This is easily my number one show of the year so far. It's going to be pretty hard to top for the rest of the year. And a theory that I have for next season, I usually suck at this, but definitely the outie uprising. I like the bit with Gemma where she's going to be trying to save Mark. And we're going to get some revelation about Devin. I do think that she is maybe not be directly working for Lumen, but has some sort of association with them as far as she may have been the part of the reason as to why Mark ended up going to Lumen in the first place to undergo the severance procedure. I really want John Turturro back, but I'm worried that we won't see him back and that storyline is going to get picked up by somebody else, like you were saying, Devin. And yeah, I think that Cobell is going to be kind of more of the reason as far as how they take down Egan, and Lumen potentially, because I feel like, again, as far as the characters that have the biggest kind of stink against Egan specifically, not necessarily Lumen, it's between Helena and Cobell. So I think it's going to come down to one of those two as far as how that gets taken down. And as far as whether or not we get 2 more seasons of the show or only 1 more season, I'm not sure about, but we will figure that out. So that's it. Those are our thoughts, our recap on Severance Season 2. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Hope you guys had a fun time keeping track of our conversations. Devin, first time on the show, you killed it. This is an absolute blast. Hopefully, we'll see you back again sometime soon. Where can the good people follow you on the interwebs? Do you have any social medias? Anything upcoming that you'd like to plug?
Nope. I mean, you could follow me at Devin Carnahan on Instagram. That's about it.
Oh, man. No, so DJ Airbud is officially gone. That's not happening anymore?
He's done.
Damn, that was disappointing. No, damn, I was so looking forward to another album of Sociology. I guess we're never gonna get that now.
Thank God.
Oh, you're too hard on yourself. That was amazing. Luke, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
They can follow me at Luke Reviews on YouTube. I think I figured out what I'm gonna do with the mega Mission Impossible video, along with our reactions and commentaries.
That's crazy. You're already recording 7 of those back to back, and you're like, I'm gonna do more. You're like the only person that I know that like wants to do that.
Yeah, I'm gonna look at the movies and how they reflect action movies of each of their eras. Because we talked about that briefly in the first movie's commentary. So
yes,
I'll try and develop that idea.
I like that. That's good. Keep up with that, definitely. And of course, you guys can follow me with everything going on at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms, at Official Talkin TV Podcast across all platforms. Be sure to tune into me and Luke doing Talkin Lost each week. We're going to start like you mentioned, we're going to start rolling out those Mission Impossible rewatch videos. Those are going to be coming soon. We recorded the first one, so that should be coming out sometime relatively soon, leading up to the release of The Final Reckoning. We'll see if it's actually the final one. And of course,
featuring Mr. Milchick as
exactly, Tremel Tilden. Exactly. So we'll be looking forward to seeing him in that. Be sure to subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube. Follow us on all of our other streaming platforms. This episode will be available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts tomorrow. And as always, people, 12 seasons of the short film and watch more fucking movies and TV. See you guys next week.